mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable to you. O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. The parable of the unjust manager is tricky. And I at times resent it, and other times, like today, I really enjoy it. And I enjoy it because nobody knows what in the world Jesus is talking about. I have read more than 40 different writings about this, and each and every single one, from evangelical to fundamentalist to Anglican, they all begin with, well, nobody really knows what this means. But, so I'm going to tell you my own interpretation of this parable with the same introduction. Nobody really knows what this means, but let's take a shot at it this way. This is the Marshall interpretation, if you will. There are relationships, and Jesus came to talk to us about relationships. The relationship that we have with God, the relationship we have with one another, the relationship we have with kings and princes and with the poor and with the handicapped, the relationship we have with members of our own family and with Jesus himself, the relationship we have with food and seasons and times and Sabbaths. He talks about relationships a lot. And so in that, I think that he's going to be talking about a relationship with this parable. And what he's talking about is a relationship that I think we all can identify with. A relationship you have with your coworkers. Whether it's a nurse or a teacher or a professor, whether they're employees or whether it's your boss, whether there's customers or vendors, we have relationships with work. And Jesus is talking about relationships based on workplace environments. And in this case, we had the dishonest manager who had a relationship with the master. He had a relationship with the vendors and the customers. And he had found out that that relationship is coming to an end. And upon understanding that that relationship is ending, the manager was figuring out, what must I do? He decided then to make business deals with the people he's in relationship with so that they owe him, and when he finds himself in need, they will then provide for him. Are you with me so far? Okay. If we look at the way that the Psalms are written, the Psalms have a black and white approach, that the righteous receive these things, the unrighteous receive these things. The righteous receive entrance into God's kingdom, and although they have bad things happening to them now, in the future, they will find themselves with God. The wicked have good things now, but they will blow away like wheat off into the wind. And so if we can use that approach, Jesus is telling the people with relationships that are dishonest to further them. That you will need to rely on your workplace relationships because you have no other relationships out there. Another way to put it is that for Doug West's memorial service, we read the gospel lesson, Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many dwelling places. I go there to prepare one for you, and I will bring you to where I am. If you are not a part of that relationship, where there's a household waiting for you in heaven that Jesus will bring you to, if you're not a part of that, then do all you can to make relationships here on earth, to make relationships so that others can take you in if you have in need. Again, it's this focalized approach of if you don't have a relationship with God and you're not walking in that way, then you might as well do these things to take care of yourself now. If that doesn't feel comforting, and if there is no good news in that, I invite you, first of all, thank you for nobody leaving at the end of the gospel. I appreciate that. And I was going to tag on to there for Reverend Maggie to say, the gospel of the Lord, nobody leave. All right, so there's good news coming. So let's hang on there for a second. So this notion, this black and white side, and it ends with, you cannot serve God and wealth. So we have the first lesson from Amos. And Amos was talking God was speaking through him, saying, you people who use dishonest scales, you don't use proper weights and measures. You who take grain and put dust in it. You who find the poor people and that you buy them as slaves for a price of sandals. I think that's serving wealth, the way that Jesus was saying you cannot serve God and serve wealth. And so if one is mixing grain with dust in order to make more money, if one is setting up deals with and buying slaves for a very, very low price, it's interesting. It didn't say you shouldn't buy slaves. It just says for a low price. But I think later on we hear about not owning people. That's serving wealth. So serving wealth in the 21st century is not working hard and finding a good life for yourself. I don't think necessarily that is serving wealth. I think that if you have a good relationship with money, a good relationship with God, good relationship with yourself and neighbors, all of that, it's all about a balance, because Jesus isn't saying that everybody needs to be poor and destitute. I think he's talking about managing well and focusing, but not taking advantage of others, not enslaving others. And so if I can take this a little bit further, if this were read in the 21st century, the caller that called my cell phone yesterday that said my social security number is being corrupted and that I need to give them my information so they can uncorrupt it. That is dishonest wealth, and that is serving wealth and not God. The people who predatory loans that go after fixed income senior citizens under the guise of having a really good reverse mortgage, where 3 years later they have neither reverse mortgage and they have been kicked out of their house. That is serving wealth and not serving God. And it's these things that I think God is warning us about. Or how about the person that sets up a factory and hires 8-year-olds to build shoes and charges an enormous amount of money for the shoes and has incredibly poor work standards for children? I think that is serving wealth and not serving God. So if you've worked hard in your life and you've saved and you've taken care of others, I don't want for 1 minute for you to think Jesus is saying you're serving wealth. It comes down to our relationships. Are you blessing others? Are you a blessing to the church? Are you a blessing to many? Are you helping others? That I think, is the line that Jesus is talking about. So some preachers would stop there, right? I'm not some preachers. I'm going to continue because this is the Marshall parable. So I'm going to throw caution to the wind. We're going to keep going. So I was working for an insurance company, and I got to hear this passage while working for an insurance company. And I had many very wealthy people that I was assisting, and I got to meet some of them. But along the lines, my wife and I discovered that God was calling us to go adopt our 2 girls from Russia. And so I had a workplace friend, and work friends were your friends while you're at work, but then when you leave, you don't really stay in contact with them anymore. And so she would fit into that category. And so she, step by step, was hearing about what Christy and I were doing, and then the time was coming for us to leave. And she said, "So you're really going to do this?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "So one daughter is 10 and the other is 15 years old." And I said, "Yeah." And she looked at me and she said, "Wow. You're going to go to heaven." What I now know is I would say, "I don't think you're the judge of that." But then, wouldn't that be interesting if she was? Anyway, but back then I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Because we are told to care for the orphans and the widows. And you're doing exactly that. You have earned yourself a place in heaven." Okay, so that's not the relationship. God didn't set it up this way. God didn't set up a relationship with us and him in heaven and all that by saying, if you do this, then I will do that. And so if God said, if you adopt some orphans, I will get you a place into my eternal habitations. If God did that, we would have no orphans left on the earth, right? Every time an orphan came up, somebody would be there to adopt. But that's not what he said, because we cannot earn our way into heaven. So you can't, by adopting kids or caring for widows and orphans or loving your neighbor as yourself, this is not how you earn a place in heaven. The way that we have our place in heaven is that God sent his only Son to set everyone free and to show the way of love and life. Heaven is belief. Heaven is following what Jesus says. Heaven is doing that. It's not by doing this, you then earn that. And that is in sharp contrast to the manager we heard about in the parable, who did these things, unscrupulous, bad business ideas, in order to gain favor so that he could live with people in their homes. Truly, that one has his reward. Our calling is to follow Jesus, and that in his faith and his grace and his love, this free gift that we cannot earn because it has already been given to us, is how we find ourselves being brought into his eternal kingdom. So what I really wanted to preach about was Amos. And so in 3 years from now, you're going to hear a sermon about Amos, and it's going to be awesome, because this lesson comes up every 3 years. And so I'm just going to briefly touch on what he was saying, and that is that the punishment for those who are dealing poorly, those who are serving wealth and not serving God, he says, I, the Lord, won't forget any of this, which I find comfort in God saying, I will remember. Now, again, the guy that called me that said my Social Security number was corrupt, I don't want him to go to hell. I'm just thinking that maybe that company is conspiring to serve wealth by ripping things off from people. Nevertheless, that the Lord said, and this is verse 11, I, the Lord, also promise you a terrible shortage, but not of food and water. You will hunger and thirst to hear my message. You will search everywhere, from north to south, from east to west. You will go all over the earth seeking a message from me, but you won't find one. That is a unique punishment. So I met with a man who, I'm going to have you come up with your own adjectives for what type of landlord he was. But his properties were in disrepair. They were in some very expensive parts of the city with people who couldn't really afford a car, so they had to live there. And he was violating local and county and state and federal regulations with his properties because they were unsafe. He was charging a tremendous amount of money and being unfair by doing it. The company I worked for was removing ourselves from insuring his properties, not because of his unscrupulousness, but because we can't charge enough money for one of his facilities to burn down and to kill everybody inside. There is no rate that we can charge that is commiserate for that. And so at the expense, it was not easy on my book of business to let him go, but we had to. So I was explaining this to him, and in his wealth and in his blindness, he just knew he would find another insurance carrier. This really wasn't any big thing off his back. And I said, so while this is going on, I will be on vacation, but I have another underwriter who will be assisting in that rollover. And he said, oh, well, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to Russia. And he said, Russia? For how long? And I said, a month. He said, a month in Russia? What are you doing there? How much is that costing? And I said, the cost isn't really that much. It's not a part of this conversation. But we could basically fly to Sweden and buy a Volvo for the price that we're going to go do what we're going to do. And he said, why don't you go to Fiji, man? Why are you going to Russia? And I said, because we're going to adopt 2 girls there. And he looked at me. What's making you do this? I said, sir, nothing's making us do this. He said, there has to be something making you do this. This makes no sense. Why would you spend that money to go that far to adopt these girls who you never know and they're older? Why in the world are you doing this? Who's making you do this? And I said, who's making me do this is God, my Savior. I just violated some company rules by saying that. But, we were cutting relationship with him anyway. It didn't matter. And so he looked at me like, God is making you do this. And I said, yeah, we are called to care for the orphans and for the widows, that there is an accounting that we need to make to God with what he has blessed us with and how we have blessed others. And then tears started to form in his eyelids. And he looked quickly out the window, and he was holding it together. What's going on? I said. I have been seeking and searching God. I have been listening, and I have been doing all I can to find him. But he's not saying a word. How is it that you know what he's saying? I, the Lord, will not forget any of this. I will give you a terrible punishment, but it's not about food and water. I will take away my message from you. You will search for me. You will look, and you will not find. I will not have a message waiting for you. And here is that guy sitting in front of me at the desk who could not hear. So where is the good news in this? Where is the good news in the dishonest manager? Why do we do this on every third year? Why do we have this one? What does God have in mind with this? So Paul wrote a letter to a man named Timothy. And Timothy was with Paul's group, and he had been sent out to bring the good news to people. And so we have this first letter that Paul wrote to him. And Paul was writing to him to tell him how to behave. And he said, first, make prayers, petitions, and thanksgivings for all people. Pray for kings, which, by the way, are dishonest managers. Pray for kings and everyone who is in authority so that we can live a quiet and peaceful life. This is right, and it pleases God our Savior. And he wants all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. And the truth is this, verse 5. There is one God and one mediator between God and humanity, Jesus Christ, who gave himself as a payment to set all people free. Timothy was being sent as an ambassador. And what Paul is doing is not shaping what he's going to say, but how he's going to live. And that he's being sent into a part of the world with dishonest managers that God has withheld his message from them. They can search north, south, east, west. They can't hear God. And he is being sent in as an ambassador to live in a particular way. And so are we. That's our message. The mission of this church is to bring the living Christ to those inside and outside of the church. We are that living ambassador that has a relationship with our neighbor and with God and with one another. We are the ambassadors that are bringing this good news that the price has already been paid, that Christ has been sent here to set us all free, and that there are right relationships and there are right ways of managing and dealing. And this isn't about the 20th century idea of evangelism, where you take a Bible and you thump it, or you stand on a street corner with a sign. This is the 21st century way of bringing the good news, of the way that you live your life, the way that you have a relationship with your neighbors, the way that you care for those who are in need, the peace that you have that comes from doing all of these things. That is the ambassador that Christ is calling all of us to be. Because those dishonest managers cannot hear God calling, but they can see you, and they can see your life, and they can see how you manage your affairs, and they can see the peace that you have. And with that, we can tell them there's one mediator. His name is Jesus. And he has come to set us all free, that the price has already been paid, and that he is asking for a relationship with God and a relationship with one another. And it doesn't matter what you've done in your life. And so today or tomorrow, you will get a phone call from somebody who is telling you that your Social Security number has been corrupt. You will get a phone call telling you that you can put your house into reverse mortgage and everything will be fine. You will get a phone call to tell you that your credit card number, if you just simply give them your credit card number, they will tell you whether or not it's been a part of a fraud. You can pray for them and peacefully decline. And when you hang up the phone, do what Paul told to Timothy. Pray for kings, pray for all in power, and pray for them in their dishonestness, that they will not find themselves at the end of their life only relying on the houses of others, but instead trusting in the love and faith from Jesus, that in his Father's house there are many dwelling places, and he will go prepare one for us and bring us to his house to be with him forever. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.